Welcome back to another lens review on my channel, and this is a video I promised some weeks back, and it's all about the Fuji GF 45 to 100mm. I used this lens for a fashion and beauty shooting in Zurich with one of my photo models. It's Sabrina this time again, which I think you saw before on my channel. And there are two wide-angle zoom lenses for Fuji GFX cameras. One is the 32 to 64, where you already find the review on my channel. Is very good for landscape, for instance, and this one here is also good for landscape, but also goes into a portrait direction, and I'm going to show this with many sample images in the course of the video. The lens has been mounted on two cameras in the sample images I'm going to show, on the Fuji GFX 100, but also on the Fuji GFX 100S. And I will let you know what camera is underlying an image when I show it. And now let's kick off the video. In the meanwhile, I sorted out the gadgets on my table, and I have now mounted the 45 to 100mm lens on my Fuji GFX 100S, and I unmounted actually this lens here, and that's the 30mm wide angle lens for Fuji GFX cameras, and this is a very special lens. I've shot this a lot during the summer break, and I'm going to post a video on the performance of that lens. I think this might be one of the best wide angle lenses I've ever shot, but that's a topic for another video. Now, focusing on this lens here, let me quickly provide a few data points what this lens is all about. First of all, it's a zoom lens. So you have a zoom ring here, and that zoom ring has quite some resistance. And I personally like that because you will not accidentally turn it to a focal length where you don't want to end up. Second, you have a focus ring here, and that focus ring is buttery smooth, but also has a reasonable resistance. And again, I like this a lot. And then we have here the usual aperture ring. So widest open is an f4, and then you can stop down all the way to 32, and you also have an auto mode here. And the lens is fully weather sealed. The build quality is fantastic, and there's absolutely nothing to complain about that lens. Zoom lenses are always a special topic for me because I'm primarily a prime lens shooter. You will find much more reviews on prime lenses on my channel than you find on zoom lenses, but I posted some videos on zoom lenses, for instance in the Hasselblad X1D camera system or for the Fuji GFX cameras, and what I typically say is it gives you the additional flex in terms of image composition you might want to have in certain shooting situations. And beauty and fashion is one of these situations, and you will see this later on in the sample images. Since the GFX camera system has what Fuji calls a large sensor, others call this a medium format sensor or a cropped medium format sensor, we actually can translate the focal length on that lens into full frame equivalent focal length. And 45mm corresponds to 36mm, and the 100mm on that GF lens correspond to 79mm. So if we round this a little bit, we have here classical focal length of 35mm wide angle and a field of view of 62.6 degrees. And here we have a typical portrait focal length of 80mm if we round this, and a field of view of 30.6 degrees. The optical construction of this lens is quite sophisticated. So we are talking here all in about 16 elements in 12 groups, and it includes 3 aspherical elements, 1 ED element and 1 super ED element. And I'm not going into detail what that means, but in a nutshell it means the way the lens transports light through the lens onto this large format sensor is quite advanced and promises very good image quality, as you will see in the sample images later on. Looking at the lens and the minimum focusing distance, if we are in the 45mm setting here, the minimum focusing distance is at 65 centimeters, so 0.65 meter. And if we go into the telephoto setting here, so 100mm or full frame equivalent 80mm, we have a minimum focusing distance of 0.82 meter. And that means you can in both settings still get quite close to your subject. And if you want to compare this with one of the lenses I use very often in the Leica system, typically 50mm Leica lenses have a minimum focusing distance of 1 meter. Here you have a larger sensor and you can get closer, and your maximum reproduction ratio, by the way, is 0.13. So you can also use this lens for close-up type or macro type situations. Just by looking at the lens, it's absolutely clear that this is a very large lens compared to what you shoot in smaller sensor systems, and the filter size is also large. It's an 82mm filter size, so if you want to use neutral density or polar filters, you have to invest a little bit if you want to have good quality. The weight of the lens is 1005 grams, so roughly 1 kilogram. And that means you also have substantial weight mounted here on the camera body, but that's clear because you have a very sophisticated optical construction here, and clearly a zoom lens also needs much more space than a prime lens. The price tag of the lens is around $2,300. Typically the zoom lenses for the Fuji GFX camera system are a bit cheaper than what you have to pay for the comparable Hasselblad X camera system, but it's still quite some money you have to spend if you want to have that lens. But the good news is whatever focal length you shoot on that lens, you get close to prime lens quality images, and that is something I appreciate and is very typical for both large format or medium format camera systems, the Hasselblad X camera system as well as the Fuji GFX system. Autofocus works quite well with this camera lens combination, and the focus mechanism built into the lens cooperates very nicely with the autofocus system of the GFX 100S. Let me quickly demonstrate this here and listen to the beep for focus confirmation. Background, foreground. It gets sometimes a bit laggy, but it is in general very quick and very much spot on. And the reason is that the GFX 100S has face detection incorporated in the autofocus system and doesn't rely on contrast detection only, and that is typically a recipe for a speedy autofocus. Also, tracking for moving subjects works quite nicely. Let me go into the Q menu here and quickly show this. So let's go here to tracking, and let's go here on this little button here to continuous shooting. And then if I focus on the face here or the head of my model, which is not really a model, you see how sticky this is and how it's tracking moving subjects and also faster moving subjects in a very nice way. So there is absolutely no complaint here, and autofocus can be safely used in that camera lens combo. What I want to do next is showing some sample images where this lens here was mounted on the Fuji GFX 100. And I said before, the 45mm correspond to 36mm, so is actually a very good setup for landscape photography. And I was shooting this lens in particular in Nandas, which is the French-speaking part of Switzerland in the mountains. And I want to show some images to show what this lens is capable of, and that the quality you get from that zoom lens is close to what you would get with a prime lens with that particular focal length. As said at the beginning of the video, typically I love to work with prime lenses, but there is one area in photography where I love to have zoom lenses, in particular if the zoom lens is as well performing as this one here, or some zoom lenses I posted videos about in the Hasselblad X camera system. And that's beauty and fashion photography. And the last part of the video is all about that. So I did work again with Sabrina, a photo model from Germany, and I want to show how the shooting was, but in particular look into sample images. And I hope you enjoy these images, all shot with the 45 to 100 millimeter lens, this time mounted on the GFX 100S, because I think the handling of that much smaller camera compared to the GFX 100 is just more my preferred choice. I hope you enjoyed my little review here, and that zoom lens here on the GFX 100S is a very flexible setup. And clearly there's also what I forgot to mention before here, the switch for activating optical image stabilization on or off, and the image stabilization in the lens cooperates with the in-body image stabilization of the GFX 100S. So you can also have much longer exposures in handhold shooting and don't need a tripod immediately if you go for a longer exposure. If you like that review, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.